Good morning, dear friends. Shalom Aleichem. Today is Wednesday, the 23rd. Mark, is that correct? 23rd of Iyar, the 5th of April. It's Wednesday. And we are on our journey through the entire Shas.
The month of May, not April.
Did I say April? Close. Okay, I'm in denial, okay?
Close.
Anyone want to join me in this denial? All right.
Sure.
May 5th.
I got to remember I didn't do it.
And we're currently studying Masechah Shabbos. We just recently started the 4th chapter, Bameh Toimnin, and the general theme that we've been discussing, although as is common in the Gemara, many wonderful diversions, we're talking about the laws of Hatmana, insulating food. More specifically, we are discussing, or we just finished a unit of discussion, and we'll continue to discuss substances that may not be used for Hatmana ever, right? Because they are moisif hevel, they increase, they add, contribute heat. They don't just help contain the pre-existing heat because we took the pot off the stove or out of the oven, but they actually contribute additional heat. Those are restricted. And the Mishnah also gave a list of items that are restricted if they are lachin, if they are moist, wet. And yesterday we concluded a discussion about if that moisture, if that dampness is internal or external, if it comes from the item itself, or if it even can be added from the outside. Reb Beryl was concerned about placing our cholent under a leak, right? And that allowed us to explore the later codifiers to look in the Shulchan Aruch. And although some of the Mefarshim on the Shulchan Aruch comment that Roiv HaAchronim are lenient, the majority of the Achronim are lenient, we looked into the Mishnah Brura and the Shulchan Aruch Harav, both that are more stringent and restrict these items when they are damp, regardless of if it comes internally or if it is external. I think the words we saw were, now I don't remember the exact wording of the Shulchan Aruch Harav, but even if water was poured onto it, it would still be a problem. So that was yesterday's Gemara. We concluded the first Mishnah, and today we're going to study in real time the second Mishnah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I have at the end of the last shiur, I realized that I lost the concept of the muktzah. That is, I thought it was quite clear. Is a hammer is a muktzah. You are not supposed to use it to hit the nail, and we are not supposed to touch it. And if it is on its way, we are not supposed to remove it, and all kinds of things. Now, it's not allowed to hit the nail on Shabbos anyway. And if you want to crack nuts, you can use the hammer because it is allowed. So what is the need for the concept of the muktzah at all? Because you are not supposed to pick up the hammer to hit the nail because you are not allowed to hit the nail. And you are allowed to pick up the hammer to crack a nut because it is allowed to crack a nut. So why do we then introduce the concept of muktzah?
Well, first of all, thank you for that question. And it's a very good question. It's a little bit of a punishment to me, by the way, because I introduced an external topic, not really punishment, but we introduced a topic that was external to the immediate Gemara. But to your question, what we've asserted is that you are correct, there are different causes or there are different types of muktzah, right, of something being off limits. Some of them are absolutely not negotiable in that they can't be handled under any circumstance. Some of the other genres of muktzah are a little bit more dynamic, shall we say, or fluid. And an instance that there is a degree of fluidity is exactly the instance that was brought up by our dear Dr. Hammer about a hammer. No, who introduced the hammer? Was it Mark, maybe? Oh, Mark introduced. Okay, I'm sorry, but I couldn't resist the pun. So, Dr. Hammer, I apologize.
Makeh b'patish, that's what you do.
Makeh b'patish. So,
not the first time, not the last time.
The point, as we read in Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, which is taken from the Gemara that we'll explore, God willing, down the line some more, is that broadly speaking, it should not be handled, period, because malach le'isr, its conventional function is restricted. However, and if we recall, we took a peek in the we took a peek in the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa, which summarized that which is born out of the Gemara and then the codifiers down to the Shulchan Aruch and the like, that says that if you have no other tool and there is a permissible use, you might be able to handle it, use the item that is muktzah exclusively for that permissible function, but it doesn't mean that you're allowed to handle it otherwise. And so it still would be muktzah, and this is where where Dr. Hammer's concept from psychology. Correct me now, so I'll get it right. Psychology or psychiatry? How would I say this? Psychology. Correct, Dr. Hammer? Dr. Hammer gave us an important principle in psychology, which is functional fixedness. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Which is that halacha is, to some extent, open to considering what the primary function is, though being aware that there might be secondary or less conventional functions. And so just because a person that has what's the opposite of functional fixedness? Because functional fixedness is a person that doesn't have a broad imagination to conceive multiple uses, correct?
Right, correct.
So what would be the opposite of functional fixedness?
Dysfunctional disfitness.
No.
You could say the absence, but there's probably a positive.
No. It's a creative. It's a.
Functional creativity.
It has somebody's creativity and imagination, and not using an article in only one way, which it's generally defined for use.
So for the purpose of this year, can we call it functional creativity?
Yeah, we could just call it creativity.
Oh, creativity. Okay. So halacha is both creative. However, it looks at the primary. If there's a primary function and a very, very atypical function, we're going to classify it as muktzah based on its primary function, notwithstanding the fact that because of our creativity, we can conceive, and one might even be allowed to use it for that alternative function when no other option is presented.
You're trying to get Bernie Hammer to teach you psychology al regel achat.
Well, it was actually a very, very good tool for this particular subject of muktzah. So we'll keep it in our toolkit. All right, so Doctor, I hope I answered your question to some extent. Admittedly, I'm sure that you're not entirely comfortable with that answer, because either it should be entirely off limits or it should be entirely permissible, and you don't like the fact that we're saying don't handle it except under certain circumstances there is a waiver. But unfortunately, that is how it as it stands. If there is a multi-purpose tool that conventionally is used for permissible and prohibited items, and I'm drawing a blank. Maybe someone here can help us think of a tool that's dual use, and one use is entirely prohibited and one use is entirely permitted. If it's equal, well, then that tool will remain permitted, although admittedly one shouldn't do that prohibited use. So it's all about the primary function and the secondary function. And by the way, this whole conversation was only introduced very parenthetically to bringing up the topic of, and I should say one more thing. We're presenting the laws of muktzah as absolute based on our reading from Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa, and the way you should practice is indeed fairly absolute. But I don't want to be misrepresenting the fact that there is broad discussions in the halachis about the precise nature and definition of the muktzah. I'm just, for the purpose of this conversation, falling back on the definition and the exact parameters provided by the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa as distilled from the code of Jewish law and other halachic works. How did this come up? It came up because we had a lengthy discussion about tools made up of different components that are snapped together and detached. And the example that the Gemara gave was a scissors. And so that triggered a whole conversation about, are scissors muktzah or not? And if they are muktzah. And so that is what triggered the conversation about functional fixedness and the various functions of scissors. And today you would buy a kitchen pair of scissors and a scissors for your barber and the like. So that was all really parenthetic, but certainly the laws of muktzah are very central and part of our our conversation. And now, my dear friends, we're going to commence a new Mishnah. A new Mishnah that's going to introduce us to a very important story, though admittedly not on the theme of our Mishnah. So take a look and we'll see. And I'd like to give a welcome. Mark, I hope you're going to forgive me for this, but I'd like to welcome Mark Rubin for joining us today on the Marsh here. No pressure, but we love having you on. And here we go. The new Mishnah. Toimnin. So we just gave a list of items that you can't insulate. So is there anything that you are allowed to insulate your food prior to Shabbos? Absolutely. And that's what our Mishnah is going to discuss. If you do hatmana, you can do it with material, with garments, with clothing. Ubepeiros, and one can use fruits. V'chanfei yoina, one can use, by the way, Rabbi Steinsaltz says peiros doesn't just mean fruits, it means all kinds of produce. So we'll put that in the back of our mind. V'chanfei yoina, with dove's wings. The Gemara will discuss what that is. I mean, we know what a dove's wing is, but we'll see if there's more description. Uvinsoris shel charashim, and the carpenter's wood shaving. So yesterday we talked about a carpenter's plane, and we showed some pictures of ancient and contemporary carpenter planes, which again is a tool which is meant to smooth out wood and has a razor which files off and has wood shavings, although I suppose you can have shavings in other manners as well. So you can insulate your pot of hot food with wood chips or wood shavings. And the shaft of fine flax. Anybody here have any background in producing linen from flax? I don't. But apparently the way linen is produced is that there is a separation of the functional and usable fibers of the linen, or rather of the flax, and the shaft, which is not functional, and the way there's a process in which it is processed so as to remove the not functional or not usable element of the flax plant. Rashi, No'iris, dak shenerin min hapishton. This is the very thin covering that is covering or on the flax. The Kairin, Arishta. I think we'll stick with shaft for now. Nisoiris, Shel Charashim, Shemenasrim Hanagorim and Ha'etzim. This is a description of the wood that comes off, that's taken off by the carpenters who are processing wood for their profession. Uba peiros. So why did Rabbi Steinsaltz say not just fruits, although usually the word peri or peirot means fruits, because Rabbi Steinsaltz has access to Rashi like we do. And Rashi says, Kigoin chitin v'kitnios. Rashi's explanation are you might use grain, wheat, or other kinds of beans or other kinds of grains. Kanfe yoina, which is literally a dove's wings. Rashi says noitza, this is really describing down, is that the right word? Feathers that were typically used in these kind of functions. And as you see how everything that we're discussing connects to everything we're discussing, not long ago we had a discussion about stuffing pillows, and it appears like in those days they were not using down. Maybe it was too expensive, or I don't know. Maybe people were anyways. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. A series of items that one may use for insulation of their pot. Again, of course, only if this is done prior to Shabbos. Those items are material, clothing, certain kinds of produce, either literally dove wings or feathers, down, the wood shavings, and the stuff that is extracted or removed from the flax. Those are all can be used for insulating your pot prior to Shabbat. Again, someone mentioned yesterday that most of what we conceive today is like a towel, so I suppose that would be this category of kisus, clothing or material. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the first opinion of the Mishnah and says, Oisor bedaka, he restricts, he prohibits insulating your hot pot on Shabbos with very fine, thin flax waste, or whatever you want to call it, but you could use begasa, a more coarse and thick flax byproduct. I wanted to read something for you.
Rabbi, how unusual is it that you would have within the Mishnah a question about something in that same Mishnah and not leave it for the Gemara?
What do you mean? Explain. I'm sorry. Explain your question. I didn't understand.
Like Rabbi Yehuda.
You want to know how is it possible that there is a machloket?
No. How often does that occur? As far as I thought, Mishnah is straight, and then all these prohibitions appear later in the Gemara.
No, many times in a Mishnah we'll find multiple opinions.
Do you want me to give you another cup? 2
And
cups? No.
the multiple opinions are presented in the Mishnah. Now, what you're referring to is sometimes we will have 2 named rabbis that are disputing, and the other times we'll simply have what we call in the Talmudic parlance, we'll say the Tana Kama, the first stated opinion, which is many times anonymous without a name, and then the second opinion, which is named. And so in this instance, you have a machloket present in our Mishnah, a machloket between the Tana Kama, the first opinion, who is presently anonymous, no name, and Rabbi Yehuda, who disagrees in a nuanced way. He says when it comes to using the chaff of flax, it needs to be more coarse, fine chaff cannot be used. And what would be the reason that you can't use it? What would be the reason behind such a restriction? Let's see if I can get you some more explanation. Just by the way, Rashi, here, so I owe you an explanation over here, but before that, Rashi tells us that kanfe yona, wings, dove's wings, mean all kinds of feathers. You saw that? Kanfe yona noitza. There is a late Lithuanian commentary, no called the Rashash from Vilna, and his commentary is famously present in the Talmud. So he says, he quotes first, the knafayim stam koil gama noitza raka. The word wings should use general soft feathers that we call down, I believe, and that's from the Gemara. However, he says that in actuality, he believes that there is a distinction between the wings and general feathers. And he says, L'kach omar kanfe yoina, l'hoyrais de dafke dumya de yoina she'ein loy hanotza raka. The Rashash makes the case that we're precluding using soft feathers. So the Rashash actually says that we explicitly are saying you can't use down, you can't use the soft, fluffy feathers that you might find in your pillow, only harder, thicker feathers. And I think, again, without having a lot of knowledge about the biology of birds, I believe that because they fly with their wings, they are created, Hashem is great engineering of all creatures, provided birds with the stronger, firmer feathers on their wings to assist in flight, and the rest of the body might be covered in a softer type of feathers. So just an idea. So you have a perspective that says that the Mishnah is being explicit and specific about which kind of feathers can be used. Now, as far as the flax matter, it appears that Rabbi Yehuda believes that the fine part of the flax would actually contribute and generate heat as opposed to the coarse and thick part. Hang on.
Maybe they're worried about the water content again?
Let me see. I don't think they're worried about the water content in particular, but it appears that there is a concern that the very fine flax can indeed, the organic matter, just like other types of organic matter in the previous Mishnah, when it's very fine, I guess has more of the ability to break down and to turn into some kind of heat conducing situation. By the way, the Gemara is going to discuss more about the specifics of Rabbi Yehuda's restriction. So again, this is a Mishnah with a series of items that are permissible to use, a little dialogue about the dove wings, and a little dialogue about exactly why Rabbi Yehuda is prohibiting using fine flax, or not fine flax, but fine chaff of flax. Let's just take a look like this: flax, plant, images. Again, anyone here have experience?
No, not any farming.
Here, Wikipedia chaff. This is a picture of rice.
We get lessons in psychology, botany.
Listen, when you learn the Gemara, you can have a very well-rounded education in every scientific topic. Because the Gemara talks all about living and regulating, and in this context, we have biology and farming and botany and the like. Okay, let's see the Gemara. And this is going to sound, as we might say, a subject from left field, but we'll see where it comes in. Amar Rabbi Yanai taught, associated to our Mishnah, relative to our Mishnah. Ready for this? Tefillin, surichin, guf, naki. For a person to wear tefillin, we must have an exceedingly clean body. What does it mean to have a clean body? Well, let's see. Elisha Baal Kinafayim, similar to Elisha Baal Kinafayim. In just a moment, we're going to pull up the story of Elisha Baal Kinafayim. So stand by. I think we might have studied it in Maseches Brachos, but we're going to review the story of Elisha Baal Kinafayim again. Here's the halacha. Ma'hi, what exactly does it mean to have a clean body? Abaya says, a person oughtn't to pass gas while wearing tefillin. Rashi explains, a person has to have the ability to control their flat. Okay. Rava says, no. A person mustn't sleep in their tefillin. Because when a person is asleep, they are not in control of their bodily functions. And so a whole host of unintended things can happen that would not be consistent with honoring the tefillin. Rashi? No. Bear with me a moment. Tosfos. Okay, we're going to see. I'm going to show you Tosfos after we see the next story. But the interesting thing is that many times in these contexts, we find that the Gemara seems to create and establish a very, very high threshold, a very high bar to certain mitzvot. And many times the Tosfos tries to consider and negotiate with reality. But let me be careful. I don't mean, God forbid, to say that the Gemara is not being realistic and Tosfos is negotiating. But many times Tosfos will help us understand what it means in practical terms, because ultimately, as our sages tell us many times, the Torah wasn't given to angels nor robots. The Torah was given to human beings. And so therefore, on one hand, the Torah considers the frailty and the imperfections, quote unquote, of man, but also is aware and doesn't expect robotic or angelic behavior. So now let's see the story, and then we'll go back to the Tosfos. V'amai kari, Lay, Baal Kanafayim. Who is this man? That the Gemara says you got to have a clean body in control of your bodily function, like Elisha, the wing man. Okay, that's probably the wrong translation. Elisha, the man of wings. Here we go. Shapa Machas, once upon a time. Ready for a story? I told you yesterday we'd see a story. Gazra Malchus Roimi Harsha Shemad al Yisrael. The Romans once decreed a decree to destroy the Jewish faith and Jewish religion. What is Shmad? What do we use Shmad in a contemporary language? What does Shmad mean? Shmad literally means destruction. Today, if you hear a person say about Shmad, especially in Yiddish, to Shmadzich would mean a person that leaves the faith. If you've ever heard that in conversation. But here we're talking about a decree that was an attempt to destroy the Jewish faith. What was the rule? Shekol hamaniach tefillin yinakru et mocho. Any person that should be caught wearing tefillin would have their brains punctured in the space of the tefillin. Rashi, shu tachas hatfillin yinakru lashon nikor einayim would be like piercing the eye, or maybe some of you are familiar with an old Jewish art called nikur or minaker, which is the process of removing parts of the hind quarter that are prohibited. But again, here, puncturing the brain, a highly unpleasant experience, known to be fatal in the state of California and elsewhere. No, so you don't want to have your brains punctured ever. And this was a terrible decree. And if we know anything about the Romans, they were highly capable of delivering on their threats. So it seems like most Jewish people understood that when it comes to a decision of life and death, or doing a mitzvah, we do not have to have Mesirat Nefesh for a mitzvah, usually. So it seems like many Jews were either wearing their tefillin in a very private way. Elisha, however, was very proud, and he would wear his tefillin and walk around in the marketplace in act of defiance against the wicked Romans. Ra'a kastor echad. He was observed by one of the Roman officials. Rashi says, kastor ministrel sheyemunakach. One of the people that were authorized to enforce this law. And they were chasing him. So he started running away. And the official chased him. The kivan shigia etzloi, once the Roman official caught up to Elisha, the wingman, he took them off his head and he held them in his hands. Amar loi, so the Roman official says, Ma zeb yadcha, what are you holding in your hands? Amar loi, he said, Kanfei yoina, I'm holding in my hands not contraband, not something that is illegal. I'm simply holding a dove's wing. So the Roman said, oh yeah, I don't believe you. Show me what's in your hand. Pashad es yadai, he stretched out his hand. V'nimsa'o kanfei yoina. And what the official observed was dove wings. How did that happen? How does Elisha have tefillin and they turn into dove wings? Anyone going to share a theory? Anybody? How did they turn into wings? I'm hoping someone's going to say that he was a magician or he practiced sleight of hands. But in truth,
there are quite a few stories about magicians who were able to persuade others, especially officials, that what they have is in fact something different, like a story about a magician who didn't have a ticket but was boarding the train, and then the controller showed him the piece of paper and persuaded him that it was a valid ticket. And there are quite a few stories I read about this. But of course, all those people were people of unusual capabilities. It's small wonder that Elisha had them.
So that explanation is actually not the conventional explanation. But the conventional explanation certainly is that Elisha merited to have a wonderful miracle in which he made a lie, he said a lie in hopes of, now again, although typically lying is not good, but I suppose the Torah would authorize a lie if there's a Roman person who wants to pop your brains out. You can try to lie to save your life. That certainly would be acceptable. And so he said a white lie. And the miracle was that what the Roman official observed was a dove's wings. And the virtue of this miracle that happened to him because of his devotion to his Jewish faith, he is forever known as Elisha, the wingman, Elisha, the man with the dove wings, because of the great miracle that occurred to him. Rashi, Kanfa Yana. Kid Mefarish Lekame, Mipnei Shem Mitzvahs, Vehein Maginim LiYisrael. Why? Now let's say this. You're being chased by a Roman, imagine, and you hide tefillin in your hands, and you have to now make up a lie about what you're holding in your hands. What would your default reaction be? What are you going to refer to what's in your hands? And particularly if you're a Jew who doesn't really want to lie, you want to say something that is somewhat close to the truth. What would you think of saying? Any theories? Any ideas? What would your white lie, or what would your lie be to get out of? And maybe, and again, I'm not qualified to comment on this. Go ahead.
Quite a few stories of white lies. So
Right.
that might be one of them.
Would you say, this is Mark, would you say it's something that
did the wing turn into phylacteries again, or Elisha had to find another pair for himself because he had wings?
That's a very good question. And Mark, I want to hear you next. The professor is asking two questions. No, he made a comment on a question. The professor commented that certainly there's a white lie would be acceptable under such a circumstance to escape certain death. That was, I think, the first point, if I heard correctly. The second point was, did Elisha lose his tefillin? Did he have to go buy another pair of tefillin? Because now his tefillin were unfortunately transformed into a pair of wings. That's an interesting question. I don't have an absolute answer for you, although we can look that up in a moment. My suspicion is that they reverted to being tefillin, but you know what? I don't know. So that's something that we need to look up. Mark, did you have you were asking?
Mine was very similar in nature. The first one, the first comment. So no, I don't. We're good.
Okay, good. So Rashi explains why he chose. Rashi explains in the Gemara later on. We'll explain why he chose of all the different things to call his tefillin, or whatever that thing in his hand. Why does he call them kanfei yoina? And it's a beautiful vart if we're looking to feel inspired about the mitzvah. Mipnei shehei mitzvot, tefillin are a mitzvah. V'hei maginim liYisrael, and we know that mitzvot protect the Jewish people. Just to throw in this today, on Wednesday we begin studying the parsha B'chukotai, right? It's a double parsha, Bahar B'chukotai. In the first aliyah today we study all about the protective nature and the blessings that come of observing the Torah and the mitzvot. And so Rashi says there are mitzvot, they protect. V'havya lehem kekanafayim liyoina, and in a sense, just like a dove's wings protect it, the mitzvot protect the Jewish people. We find in different places in the Bible, I believe particularly in Shir HaShirim, the Jewish people are defined as doves, and so therefore it's entirely appropriate. The protection of the dove is a good allusion to the protection of a mitzvah to the Jewish people. So we said a white lie, but in truth, he found a alternative fact that is very much reflective of the truth of the nature of tefillin, which is to be protective of the Jewish people. So this story about the power of wearing tefillin and the sacrifice that Elisha had to wear tefillin is all introduced to us very much parenthetically, because our Mishnah mentions the use of dove wings for the insulation of our food. Now let me just take a fast scan to see if we can answer or find any comment on our professor and Mark's question about what happened to the tefillin.
Rabbi, I don't want to
Bill, go ahead.
To ruin the magical atmosphere, but
Okay.
my shaila would be, what does Elisha have to put on tefillin and go into the marketplace and risk all this?
You're asking who asked him to tempt fate. So this brings us actually to another point, which I was debating bringing up before, which is that there is typically a Jew is allowed to break all the mitzvot besides for 3, if it's a matter of life and death. So if a person breaks into your house and says, turn on your computer and log into your bank account on Shabbos, or he'll do what the Romans were threatening, you're allowed to desecrate the Shabbos, turn on your computer, log on, and give your bank account information. And I'm not a big maven over here, but I suppose certainly it would be the wise thing to give up all money to not be killed.
Better to leave it on the bed like the Gemara had.
However, if in a very public setting, you as the proud Jew of your family and your community are called by an antagonist of the Jewish people who's seeking to demoralize and destroy the Jewish people, and at a time where they're seeking to outlaw Judaism, you're asked to publicly denounce your Judaism or to publicly break your tradition, there it is entirely not certain that you should give in. It's quite possible that it would be acceptable for a person to choose to give up their life and not give up their faith. I'm not saying necessarily it's a big discussion if you have to or if it's allowed to. But the point is that Elisha Baal Kanafayim is living in an era where Judaism is about to be snuffed out. They're trying to totally destroy the Jewish people. And therefore, it's possible that his act of defiance here, Reb Beryl, is not the crime that we would typically perceive it to be. He was doing the right thing to taunt the Romans and to encourage the Jewish people to do small acts of defiance to keep our people going. And as we know, many times one person can make all the difference and raise morale for the people. Now, he certainly risked his life. However, now that a miracle happened for him, the boost for the Jewish morale was doubled. Not only was he proud and reminding the Jewish people to adhere to their traditions, but he actually had a miracle that protected him in doing so. So that would be why that's a possibility of why he chose to do this act of defiance, even though he was putting himself at risk. Had he said, I know a miracle is going to happen to me and therefore I'm doing this, he probably would have been incorrect, right? That's the famous medrash about Avraham Avinu and his siblings, right? Abraham, in absolute devotion to Hashem, was willing to be thrown into the fire. And it says that his brother witnesses Avram's miracle. And he says, you know what, I'll go along with him. And he was killed in the fire. And that's why Lot ends up being part of Avram's team, because his father died. But he was only willing to do so once he saw the miracle happen. So had Elisha Baal Kanafayim said, I'll do this because the miracle is going to happen, he probably would have been wrong. Because it was a decree against the Jewish people, a Shas Hashmad, his defiance, even for the mitzvah of Tillin, is certainly acceptable, if not the ideal response.
Rabbi, I think it's a good question, but your answer raises other important issues.
Go ahead.
Particularly whether this is a model. So you heard that this guy did this, and there was a big miracle. So now you're emboldened to, okay, we're going to show our tefillin publicly. So the next couple of guys get killed, and they say, "What are you crazy? Why'd you do that?" Well, we heard that
No, we're not saying that people should ever be suicidal. We shouldn't seek out.
Nothing, but I mean, going back to why he did it, which Red Beryl was asking, what was, what did he intend to accomplish?
It's very difficult, especially since you have no obligation to put on tefillin in public. Nothing
That is
wrong.
certainly true. That is certainly true that there's no obligation to wear tefillin in public. However, here, because of the Shema, because it appears that he's doing this in an act of defiance. Now, just to share with you, because I'm looking here on some of the comments that are provided to us by the wonderful Mesivta Gemara. So he brings from the Gra that it's possible that Elisha actually knew he's going to be caught. He was looking to make a big statement. Why was he running then? He was hoping to have another moment to observe a mitzvah. That's an interesting thing. And then here the note brings what I just told you, which is that the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that although typically a person is not allowed to die for a mitzvah, besides for the 3 cardinal sins, right? Idol worship, to murder another, to worship idols and immoral prohibited activities. B'shas hagzeira, during a decree, a person can, or according to some must, give up their life, even for a mitzvah kala, for a small mitzvah. But of course, so here he brings from Tosfos. Should we look at here one second? Give me a second. I told you I'd go back to Tosfos, so bear with me a moment. So hold that thought for a moment. So we asked, why does the Gemara says you always have to have a clean body like Elisha Baknafine. The Gemara provides no proof that Elisha actually was super in control of his body. So Tosfos asks, how do we know that Elisha was actually a model for cleanliness, or the halachic cleanliness, control of his body? Well, he says, obviously, if he merited to experience a miracle, it must be certain, we are certain that he observed the mitzvah in its ideal form. And it must be evident that he had a clean, halachically clean body. Then he says like this, and this is the comment that I was telling you before. He says, therefore, based on this definition, if I understand this Tosfos correctly, we can't, we might say, listen, we're holding up a model for tefillin, ideal tefillin wearing to this guy who gave up his life. Maybe we aren't capable of possibly wearing tefillin, because how can we control our body? This just seems to be saying, listen, you gotta wear tefillin. Then then Tosfos here says something that is shocking. A shocking comment. You want to see this? It shouldn't be a shock that this very day, in the time of the Tosfos, I believe, tefillin happens to be a weakened mitzvah. And we find actually in several different sources that different times in that era and slightly beforehand, not everybody might have been wearing tefillin, or maybe not wearing tefillin all day. Even in the time of the Gemara, we find comments that indicate that tefillin was not sufficiently prevalent. Some people were weak in the mitzvah of tefillin. And he quotes later on, he quotes a recently passed teaching in the Gemara that says like this: Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar taught, Kol mitzvah shalei masru atzmon Yisrael aleha b'shas gzeiras hamalchus, a mitzvah that the Jewish people were not willing to go all in an outright defiance, b'shas gzeiras hamalchus, at the time of Roman persecution, and an instance of a mitzvah that not all the Jews were super vigilant about. Kigoin tefillin, for example, tefillin, and our Gemara is actually evidence of that, because we have one man who's recorded as having been defiant about tefillin. Adayin hi refuya biyadam, it appears that maybe it never was able to be fully restored. So just to point out that we have to understand how lucky we are today that we live at a time where if you want to buy a pair of tefillin, I mean, I would tell you to spend the $900 to get a really muhadar pair of tefillin, but if you can't afford it for $500, $600, you can have a pair of tefillin, and there's nobody in 2021 in America telling you not to do so. But we see from Tosfos a survey of the fact that throughout Jewish history, tefillin was hard to come by, and there are many reasons, many external forces seeking to prevent the wearing of tefillin. Anyway, Tosfos continues, but I just wanted to give you that sobering perspective that Tosfos brings to the table about if the prevalence of wearing tefillin.
Rabbi.
Hold on one second. This certainly should not be taken as an inspiration for us to be less vigilant about wearing tefillin. The whole point of this Gemara is how important it is to wear tefillin, but to be aware of the fact that there were times in history where it was much harder to do so. Our Kohen, please go ahead.
Didn't Mordechai do the same thing, or in a different way?
He publicly carried out a gathering of mourning. That wasn't really defiance, if I'm not mistaken. It was more an act of public devotion and to inspire the Jewish people to do teshuvah. Here, Elisha
No,
Bakna
when he refused to bow down to Haman.
Oh, yes, correct. Except, what would be the difference between Mordechai refusing to bow down to Haman and Elisha Baknafayim? Bowing down to Haman may have been Avodah Zarah, and if
They both could have ended in disaster.
That's true too. If it was truly Avodah Zarah, he may have had no halachic choice in the matter. He may have been compelled to resist, even at the pains of death. Whereas wearing tefillin is typically not at all a mitzvah that a person should risk their life.
Yeah, it says that Haman wore an idol on his or something, so that he
right. So I'm sure there are commentaries that say that it wasn't so much an act of avodah zarah, but that is certainly the conventional way that we understand the story.
The answer, of course, Rabbi, is kavana. One is proactive and one is reactive. And kavana is different in each one.
Now let's just absolutely. Now let's take a fast look at Tosfos. I started reading it to you, but here, why is Elisha willing to die to wear tefillin? The Gemara says, when there is a gezeras hamalchos, when there is a decree, and what I started saying before is that we have at least one person who lived under conditions that Judaism was illegal, and there were times that observing Judaism could have literally been a death sentence or a prison sentence, and not that far in the past. I don't know if the professor is with us this moment, but certainly we know that our brothers living in the what is the former Soviet Union, certain mitzvot and certain acts of religion would for sure cost your entry into college and your occupation, and possibly, depending on what it was and when exactly, could have meant a prison sentence or worse. But anyways, the Gemara is saying at a time where there's Xeris Malchus, one can and should perhaps give up their life, even for the smallest of matters like style. And like a time the Gemara Tosfos mentioned that maybe people were under pressure to dress in a manner that would look like an idolater, an idol worshiper. Hold on.
Give this reference number 510.
Oh, okay. Tosfos says, you know what the chiddush here is?
3. And when you
Tosfos is actually saying what Beryl said.
Reference number.
What's the chiddush here is that he could have put the tefillin in quiet. He could have put the tefillin in private. So the big chiddush, and also possibly what's special here is that maybe not everybody had to do what Elisha did. Maybe not everybody had to run around in public. But anyways, he chose to do so, and it becomes a celebrated story. It becomes a story that inspires us about the value, the virtue of tefillin, and he's certainly a model to uphold about someone that was truly passionate about tefillin wearing. Elisha, as we mentioned, did not depend on a miracle. He didn't know a miracle would happen. He was hoping that they wouldn't inspect what he was holding in his hands. Okay, one of the commentaries, I believe this is a commentary in the Shulchan Aruch, says, to answer, and then we're moving on, to answer the professor's question, says, not that they literally transformed to a kanfayona. The miracle was that the official who caught him, his glasses became foggy and it looked like a dove's wing. By the way, there are some people that have the tradition to wrap the tefillin on two sides, and it's brought that may be to model this idea of kanfayona, the wings of a dove. It's kind of like two wings on two sides of the tefillin. All right, let's continue the Gemara. We just have a few more minutes. Let's see. Why did Elisha choose to call them the dove's wings as opposed to any other kind of bird? Because the Jewish people are compared to a yoina. Shnamar kanfe yoina nechpa bakesef. In Tehillim we say that the dove wings are covered with silver. Just like a dove, its wings protected. Af Yisrael mitzvahs medinos aleha. And as we read in Rashi, now we're reading the Gemara that the wings of a dove protect the Jewish people. And the mitzvahs protect the Jewish people. Question: How do wings protect a bird? They're not bulletproof.
Get him out of the way of the danger.
So first of all, yeah, bird wings get you out of trouble. Rashi says simple, minatzina. It provides additional warmth from the cold. And it also allows a bird to protect itself from any a threat.
It's like, yeah.
Apparently, doves have a combative function of their wings. I don't know this firsthand. Again, I'm not but maybe Rashi says that a dove's wings provide a host of kinds of protection. And so too the Jewish people are protected by the mitzvot. We got to read at least a little more Gemara. The Mishnah says that you're allowed to also insulate with the scrappings of wood and with flax, etc. Now the Gemara asks a question, which I took for granted. I didn't even consider the question when I was reading the Mishnah, but the Gemara asks a question. Rabbi Yehuda makes a comment. Coarse stuff should be used, fine stuff shouldn't be used. I translated it coarse flax versus fine flax. But the Gemara asks, when Rabbi Yehuda says coarse, not fine, was he talking about wood chips? Or was he describing the chaff of the flax? The Gemara wants to know. Tashema, the Gemara says, let's figure this out. Tanya, there's a brayta that teaches as follows. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yehuda teaches, Na'ires shel pishtan harehu kizevel. Fine chaff of flax is just like manure in the fact that it is moisif hevel. It generates heat. Shma mina, and Na'ires shel pishtan kai. Clearly, the way I read the Mishnah was accurate and consistent with the teaching that the Gemara here provides. Shma mina, that his discussion was exclusively about fine flax. My dear friends, today we've concluded a Mishnah and the entire Talmudic analysis of it. Let's do a fast recap. Our Mishnah goes on to list items that are permitted to be used in insulating a pot, with in the end a small debate, well, not a small debate, a debate about small chaff, Rabbi Yehuda restricting it, unlike the Tanakama, the first opinion of the Mishnah. Give me 1 minute. The Gemara then went on to tell us the fascinating story of Kanfei Yoina, the wingman, starting off by saying how important it is to have a clean body. Tosfos is saying that although it's true we need to have a clean body, Ezra, don't go anywhere. So come listen. We're giving 2 words of Gemara, and then we'll take care of you. He kept a clean body, made sure that there should be no flatulations. Is that the right word? And a clean body also means not to fall asleep, where a person loses control of their bodily function. And then the Gemara tells us the story of Elisha Bal Knafayim, Elisha the wingman. The story was the Romans outlawed wearing tefillin. It's brought in some of the commentaries. The prohibition was only tefillin shel rosh, the head tefillin, which is typically public. Apparently the Romans didn't care about the shel yad, according to some commentators here. And if they would wear tefillin, their brains would be pierced. Elisha wore the tefillin in defiance in the market. He was caught. He was chased. When he was almost caught, he put the tefillin in his hand and says, And the guy said, what are you holding? He said, look, I'm holding the wing of doves. And to the Roman official, that's what they saw. And he was let off the hook. And from then on, he was known, Elisha, the man that had the miracle with the wings of doves. Why did he choose his white lie to be about a dove, wings of a dove? Because the Jewish people are called a dove. That's Rashi points out. And the wings are particularly protective, just as the mitzvot are protective of the Jewish people. Beautiful connection to today's portion of the Chumash. And then lastly, the Gemara asks, when Rabbi Yehuda says the fine stuff is problematic, was he talking about wood chips, wood shavings, or was he talking about the flax, the undesirable component of the flax plant? And the Gemara answers clearly, we're not talking about wood chips, we're talking about flax, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, it could become hot or generate heat, just like Zevel and other items. That's today's Gemara, a short Gemara, in my biased opinion, a very interesting and fundamental story, touching upon a lot of the very important Jewish matters, when about sacrificing one's life, when to take a risk in Jewish observance, when not. Miracles can and do happen, but we shouldn't count on them. And however, in a time of a Gzeira, it is appropriate and praiseworthy to stand up, to speak truth to power, and to stand up and to uphold our Judaism proudly. And that is why we 2,000 or so years later, we're still mentioning the name of Elisha Bak Nefayim. Hashem should bless us all. We should never have to sacrifice life or limb in the observance of Torah mitzvot, built to be proud and healthy Jews. In closing, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I would like to mention the names that we are praying for a complete and speedy healing, as well as for the Yeshua, for Yosef ben Flora, and we're mentioning Jonathan Chaim and Victoria for Refuah Shlema, David ben Sultana Malka, Esther bas Simcha, Mazel bas Esther, Michal ben Esther for Refuah Shlema, and we're mentioning the neshama of David ben Avram, his neshama Shavan Aliyah. Now, I think we failed to also celebrate yesterday an important event. Is it possible that somebody on this chat is experienced and celebrated their birthday yesterday?
Who could that be?
So we want to wish Rabbi Allen a happy Facebook and English birthday. You should have a year of mazel and bracha. And we're grateful to have you as our kohen to provide blessings and insight. And you should celebrate until 120. Gesundheit, Freiligkeit, and we should have all the koyach and circumstances to continue with our Gemara Chabura for the entire Shas. Happy birthday, Mazel Tov. And again, thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Alan. Shikoyach, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shkoyach.
Any more?
Should we take who just,
Just look.
take a tefillin selfie? I mean, not a tefillin, a Gemara selfie.
It's interesting that they would outlaw tefillin, especially Shel Rosh, because there's not too much in Jewish tradition that you can't do privately. Even the tefillin Shel Yad, you wear a robe, they wouldn't see it.
Right. You can hide your tefillin Shel Yad, correct? Interesting.
Put a hat on with a tefillin Shel Rosh also.
Now, there are people, by the way, that have a way to. Also, here's what I want to share. It's apparent that the tefillin that they wore in those days may have been a little smaller than some of the tefillin that you see today. And one of the things that makes me consider this is if you've ever been to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and you know that there are tefillin from the Dead Sea sect. Now, granted, they weren't Pharisaic Jews, and so it's possible that the tefillin that the Chazal wore were a little different. But I think we can surmise that probably the size was approximately so. And so they probably had a smaller tefillin that he could hold in his hands. And certainly my tefillin that are quite large, I would not be able to hide within the hands. So just
fortunately, Elisha didn't have tefillin Shel Rabbi Tam on top of everything else.
Oh, but what I was getting to is that there are people that figured out how to have a hat that could cover up the tefillin. And you have people during the Holocaust that had specially small pairs of tefillin that they somehow kept hidden for a while. And I never understood it, but obviously they were small. And anyways, that's today's Gemara. Thank you all for joining us.
Shikoyach. Have a great day, everyone.
We're gonna end the link, and I'm gonna ask everyone to please rejoin to study today's Chumash portion. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Ayah Shikoyach.
Thank you.